Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's University of Maine Cooperative Extension Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. Thank you all for joining us. This is week number 17 of our food preservation webinar series. These webinars deliver current USDA recommendations for preserving food at home, corresponding with what's growing in your garden and what's for sale from local farmers. I'm Lisa Fishman, and I'll also be joined today by my colleagues, Kate McCarty and Kathy Savoy in the demo kitchen. The University of Maine Cooperative Extension is here to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and nutrition, which includes food preservation. Today, we'll focus on pressure canning soups and stocks. It's so satisfying to be able to preserve your homegrown or locally purchased produce as delicious soups and stocks, helping you fill your pantry with Maine-grown foods. We'll detail everything you need to know about how to do this safely, while creating a tasty final product that you and your family will enjoy. Some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. We do want to answer your questions, so please ask them as they come up through our presentation by typing them into the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Thanks for joining us. Now, let's get started.
So homemade soups and stocks are a treat to have on the shelves. Freezing these products is always an option, but it's so nice to have a jar of chicken stock or vegetable soup ready to pop open without having to plan ahead and thaw some. Soups and stocks made from vegetables and or meat need to be pressure canned. So these foods are low acid, which means they have a pH of above 4.6. When we create a vacuum seal through canning, these foods are vulnerable to developing the botulism toxin unless they are thoroughly heat treated, and that, of course, is where the pressure canner comes in. So a pressure canner uses steam in a sealed container to destroy any spoilage organisms that might be inside your canning jar. Together, steam and pressure allow us to heat our food to temperatures from 240 to 260 degrees Fahrenheit, which is much hotter than boiling water. These high temperatures are what allow us to safely process our low acid foods like vegetables and meats. Low acid foods run the risk of allowing C. botulinum spores to develop into toxins if not properly heated, which can cause a type of food poisoning called botulism. The high temperature inside the pressure canner destroys any C. botulinum spores in your jars and creates a vacuum seal, which together make your canned soup and stock safe for long-term storage. So the take home is that a pressure canner is the only way to safely can soup and stock. A boiling water bath simply does not create hot enough temperatures to destroy C. botulinum spores. And Kathy in our demo kitchen is going to kick us off and show us how to use a pressure canner to safely can soup and stock.
Thanks, Kate. And I am in the demo kitchen today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the recipe that we're going to demonstrate. And that is a beef stock recipe. And it comes directly to us from the USDA Complete Guide for Home Canning. And it is featured in the meat section. And it is a meat stock or broth recipe. And just want to emphasize that this is the same procedure that you would use to make either chicken or turkey broth as well. So it is a recipe that requires a little bit of prep time. So I want to explain a little bit about what has been done ahead of time. And I've taken some pictures of my steps along the way. So step one, you can see I have collected some soup bones that are So today it's beef that we're doing. So those are beef soup bones. And I've put them in my crock pot. And I needed to get my crock pot up and going because I didn't have a time frame of 3 to 4 hours to be able to be at home with it. So the crock pot came into work, and I simply covered those beef bones with some water, salt, pepper, and a few bay leaves. And I put my crock pot on high and let this simmer away, as is what's explained in the directions, for 4 hours. And you can see in the third picture what a wonderful broth was created in those 4 hours of simmering. And then from that point, I did strain the broth because it does have a lot of the bones that are still in there, as well as the bits of beef that have been cooked down and reduced, but still maintain somewhat of a chunk. So I did use a strainer to get rid of those things. And then for the next step, I simply put the beef stock into the refrigerator, and through chilling, the fat separated out from the wonderful stock, and I was able to skim off all of that fat that we do not want to have in our beef stock. So you can see in the fourth picture, that is what's happening. I mean, I love to use a wide spatula. It's a great tool to skim off that fat layer. Once it's cold, it comes off very easy. It is solid, and you just take that off and get rid of it. So now we'll join me in the kitchen, and I'll walk you through the steps of what we're doing here. So as you can see, I have my pressure canner out and ready, and I have my beef stock that has had the fat removed, and I've brought it back to a boil. So that's the step that we're at here. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how to get ready for pressure canning. So some of the things that I've done is I have my cleaned workspace, and I have my pressure canner that I've checked to make sure it's ready for its work day today. And to do that, I have assessed some of the features that are on the lid to make sure they're in good working condition. So this is the lid for our pressure canner, and you can see that it has this black button right here, which is called an overpressure plug. And I look to make sure that's intact and that it's pliable and it's in good working condition. I also check my air vent, which is this right here, and I look through it to make sure it hasn't been plugged by any residue from anything else that's been cooked in the pressure canner, because that's where we want to get our full piston of steam that comes through. So if it were clogged, we'd have some problems. So we avoid that by making sure that it is wide open and can be seen through. As far as my base for my pressure canner goes, I have prepared it by putting 3 quarts of water in the base of the pressure canner, along with the rack that comes with the pressure canner. And today I'm using this unit, which is a Presto weighted gauge pressure canner. And so you'll see this in action today. So those are the parts and pieces of my pressure canner that I want to double check. The other thing is to look at this gasket that's inside and to double check that it is nice and pliable. It hasn't developed any cracks or anything. And just to double check that that's in good working condition. The other piece on the lid is the lock, and you just want to make sure that that's moving and is going to be able to do what it does as the pressure canner heats up, which is to lock and stay in place. So that's certainly moving and doing everything that we want it to do. So I just want to back up and reinforce what Kate said about it is perfectly safe to freeze your stock. And so this is the point that we would choose to either freeze it or move forward with pressure canning. So if I wanted to freeze it, I would simply put it in a freezer grade container and go ahead and freeze it with a label and date on it. You could also continue to reduce it by cooking it down and then freezing it in more of a concentrated state. So either way is fine, but this would be that place where you detour off into freezing. But that's not what we're gonna do today. We're gonna go ahead and set this up for pressure canning. So I've got my washed jars, which are here, staying warm in some warm water. And I'm using a pint-sized jar today. The directions are for either a pint-sized jar or a quart-sized jar. And I'm using a pint. That tends to be the size that my family would use more often. So again, washed jars that have been kept warm. And I'm gonna go ahead and fill that jar using my jar filler. And again, this lovely beef stock that has been brought to a boil. And you can see the nice color that we've gotten from those. Again, I had about, I would say 5 soup bones that I cooked down. And what is interesting, and certainly what is a different thing than what we have been doing in weeks past, is with the headspace. When we pressure can things, we need to have a bigger air pocket. So the headspace for this recipe is actually 1 inch. So I've got my jar pretty well full, and I'm going to use my headspace tool to check to see if I'm at 1 inch. So this again is that lovely tool that has the 1/4 inch increments. So I'm going to double check on the 1 inch mark, and I actually overfilled my jar. So I'm going to go ahead, and I like to keep a spoon handy for when things like this happen, so that instead of having to dump out the jar, I can simply use a small spoon and get my product back into the pot, and to check that I am at that 1 inch mark. So again, this pressure can soup is looking for 1 inch of headspace. So there we are at 1 inch, and I'm going to double check it again. No need to remove any air bubbles here because we don't have any chunky foods that can be trapped in there. So I'm going to pay special attention to wiping off the rim of my jar very carefully. This beef stock, even though I have skimmed the fat off of it, it can still have oil in it. And we want to do an extra fine job here because we don't want the oil to get in place of having a vacuum seal form. So we've got our jar ready. Check the headspace. Now we're going to put the dome lid in place, and we're going to then put the screw band on. And fingertip tight is the directions that we use here. And we've got a little pot holder here to keep us in place. And fingertip tight, again, that's as tight as just my fingertips can make it. If I were to put the palm of my hand down on there and really crank it on, I could make it tighter, but that's not what we want to do. It's just until it's fingertip tight and no more. So once we have our jar filled, it's hot, and I'm going to use my jar lifter to carefully lift it up and over and get it into my pressure canner, where again, I have a rack in place, and I have 3 quarts of water in there. And I have kept this, I've started to warm it up a little bit. And I'm now going to get my lid in place. So each canner comes with a great set of directions, which you're going to want to keep on hand, and follow those to a T. They are the manual that's specific for your make and model. So it's got a lot of important information in it. So my lid, and I don't think you can read this, it has an embossed close and open arrows that I'm going to be mindful to follow, as well as there is an arrow on the base of the pressure canner that I'm going to line things up with and then lock it in place. So slides down like that, and then I manually push it in place. That takes a little bit of muscle, and you then want to make sure that you're centered on your burner, which you crank right up to high. And it's important to talk about the science of what's happening right now, and that is those 3 quarts of water that we've got in the base of the pressure canner. as we're applying the heat, generating that steam, which is going to be forcing that trapped air out of the pressure canner through this little vent port. And you can start to see, and I'll stand to get myself behind it. We want to exhaust our canner for 10 minutes. So that means we want to see a consistent billow of steam coming through this port for 10 minutes. And you can start to see, this is a great gas range, you can already start to see that it's coming through. We want to wait for it to be consistent, which it's starting to get to that point. And hopefully you can start to see that. And if not, as the person in the kitchen here, I can feel that. So we've got a pretty good consistent billow of steam that's coming out. You can see that now. And I'm going to go ahead and start my timer for 10 minutes. And again, whoops, timer, there we go, 10 minutes. So we want to let this vent for 10 minutes. And again, that is building a chamber of steam in here, which is that high temperature that's going to be what we need to process this low acid food safely. Another thing that you may be able to see happening is that the cover lock is having a little bit of sputtering of hot water around it. And eventually that lock will push up and be another form of a lock that's in place to help us know that our pressure canner is a safe unit to use. And there it goes, it's locked in place. So again, these are normal things that are happening with a pressure canner, and you may see some condensation forming around your handles. It's also normal to see some around the overpressure plug. But again, we let this billow of steam process for 10 minutes. So I'm going to let you know that we've got about 9 minutes left in this exhausting venting portion of our pressure canning. So I'm going to toss it back to Kate, who's going to talk a little bit more about soups and stews, and then you'll join me back in the kitchen to see where we're at.
All right, thanks, Kathy. So yes, let's talk soup. So to can soup, you first need to make up your own recipe, but as long as you follow a few fundamentals. So you need to use ingredients for which there already exist canning recommendations. You can see some of the vegetables and meats that are available. These already have established canning recommendations. So we know they are safe to can using a pressure canner, and that means that they can all then go into your soup. So we're going to be talking more about canning meat and the ins and outs of all of that in our October 20th webinar. So once you've chosen your ingredients, you're going to prepare each one according to the hot pack instructions for canning. And then you'll combine your chosen vegetables and meat, if you're adding it, into a stock pot, and then cover them with water, stock, or broth. And you can season this with your choice of spices and herbs and bring it to a boil, and then boil it for 5 minutes. And then you're ready to can your soup. So you'll fill your warm pint or quart jars halfway with the solids from your soup, and then cover it with the liquid of the soup. And you'll leave 1 inch of headspace and apply the lids. And I did see someone has a question about that headspace measurement. It is very important to get the 1 inch right. So no more than 1 inch or no less than 1 inch. If you add too much soup, it could overflow in the canner as it's processed and prevent a seal from forming. And if you don't add enough, or if you leave too much headspace, so you leave more than 1 inch in your soups or stocks, you run the risk of your jars not being properly processed, as there could still be oxygen inside the jar, which could fuel those spoilage organisms we're looking to avoid. So back to soups, when you've made your, or you filled your jars, you're gonna pressure can those for 60 minutes for pints and 70 minutes for quarts, at 11 pounds of pressure in a dial gauge and 10 pounds of pressure in a weighted gauge. And don't forget to adjust for altitude as needed. So if you do choose to add seafood, you'll need to up the processing time to 100 minutes, which is the equivalent of 1 hour and 40 minutes at the same pounds of pressure. So now Lisa's going to give you some more tips about canning soup.
I certainly am. So we have a list of do's and don'ts when we're making our soups that we're using our own recipes for. So one of the things is, even though chicken rice soup and chicken noodle soup are very, very popular choices for canning, you don't want to add noodles or other pasta, rice, flour, cream, or other thickening agents to your home canned soups. These ingredients might be delicious, but they can interfere with the heat penetration during the processing of your soup and make it improperly canned. Not only that, but the pasta and the rice will become very overcooked after their time in the pressure canner. You do want to add these ingredients to your soup just prior to serving. You don't want to add dried beans or peas to the soups that you are canning. Dried beans in your soup will absorb the liquid and interfere with heat processing. So these need to be rehydrated before the canning. You want to definitely rehydrate your dried beans and peas first by adding 3 cups of water for each cup of the dried beans or peas. Boil for 2 minutes, remove from the heat and let them soak for 1 hour. Then reheat to boil. You can also use canned beans instead of dried beans in your soups. Don't choose cuts of meat with a large amount of fat or chicken with the skin still on. Large amounts of fat can break down during the canning and interfere with the seals from forming on your jars. You do want to remove as much fat as possible before the processing. Chicken skin should be cut away and discarded. Don't neglect to make the pieces of your vegetables and meats consistent in size. You do want to ensure that all of your meats and vegetables are uniform in size, which allows for even heat penetration during the canning and will ensure spoilage organisms are destroyed. You don't want to forget to adjust time for altitude. You do want to add additional time for your altitude above sea level. Water boils at a lower temperature at higher altitudes, meaning the environment inside the pressure canner is not as hot. Adding additional time will thoroughly allow for heat penetration of the jars during the canning process. Don't skip testing your pressure canner's dial gauge annually for accuracy. The dial gauge is the one on the right. You do want to connect with your local extension office to arrange for a free accuracy test. Weighted gauges do not need to be tested for accuracy, but dial gauges do. We will send you the contact information for our testing services in every Maine county. Okay, I think we're ready to go back to Kathy in the demo kitchen to see how the pressure canning process is coming along.
Thanks, Lisa. And I did keep my video up throughout that whole time because I feel that it's really important for you to be able to see what it normally looks like to be exhausting your pressure canner. So you can see we've got quite a billow of steam that has been going through the vent hole, and we've still got just under 2 minutes left to be able to put our regulator on to start our processing time once it gets to that point where it's got a consistent jiggle. So let's talk a little bit about this regulator. This is a weighted gauge pressure canner. So it comes with, as you saw on that last slide, different weights, and you can use it in a 5-pound weight. This is set up for a 10-pound weight, or you can go as high as 15 pounds of pressure with this particular unit. So our processing for this beef broth is 10 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes. So I removed one of the rings, and I am now down to 10 pounds of pressure, which I will go ahead and put on the vent port once our exhausting venting time has expired, which we're getting really close. And I just want to point out the importance of holding on to your equipment manual that comes with it. I put these in plastic bags, keep them safe, keep them away from getting wet. And this is my go-to guide for this specific make and model of a pressure canner. In the event I needed to reorder some, if I lost the regulator, this would be where I'd find that information. If you don't have the manual for your pressure canner, you can always use your favorite search engine and enter the information that you have on your product, be it the information here, the make, the model, and enter the words free manual, and hopefully that information will come up for you, because it is very valuable, very important to keep on hand. I'm looking at my timer up here, which I have 10 seconds left, and I think it's really important for you to see how the pressure regulator goes onto the pressure canner. It does make a little bit of a hissing noise, and it can scare people. I've seen numerous students in our classes kind of throw the regulator out of fear, but please watch and listen to the noise that it does make. So going over this big billow of steam, ready? And now it's in place. So be prepared for that. Don't be scared by it. And what's happening now is we've got 10 pounds of pressure that's being forced down, and this will start to jiggle once it's gone beyond the 10 pounds of pressure in this chamber, and it actually can lift up and allow this to jiggle the weight and release some of that pressure. So that's what you're looking to have. And once this starts to jiggle, you will start your processing time of 20 minutes. So we've got a pretty good output on this burner. So I'm gonna guess that we're gonna come to a jiggle pretty quickly. And I think I can probably talk us through to that point. And again, I've got my burner on full high heat. And we should start to see it doing some jiggling soon. I will point out that pressure canners are each unique. There is a different style of pressure canner on the back, on top of the refrigerator that we have here, which is a Miro larger pressure canner. And it is a weighted gauge as well. But when you read the manual, you know that that regulator likes to jiggle 2 to 3 times per minute to be at the right pressure point, versus this one says it should jiggle. So you really want to make sure, read your manual, and know what are the recommendations for your type of pressure canner. I want to point out something that's happening right now, and that is there is condensation forming beneath the pressure regulator. That is normal, okay? Don't be alarmed by that. I mentioned previously, you may see condensation around the handles and around the cover lock as well. Those things are normal. Don't be concerned with them. I think we're going to be coming to a jiggle pretty soon, and I think that's an important thing for you to be able to see on the video. So we'll continue to wait for that. But important time for you to be putting your questions in the Q&A box. And looky, we're at our point of a jiggle. Sounds a little bit like a train starting to move out of the station. So what we want to do now is start our timer for 20 minutes. And then also begin to regulate our heat so that it maintains a nice jiggle, a constant jiggle, but not overly robust. So I've backed it right down to about medium, and we're gonna let it regulate itself. And I'll back it off as I need to. And right now, I think we're gonna go into the Q&A.
Okay, we have a lot of great questions. The first one is from Andrea. And she would like to know, do you ever roast the bones first? And if so, how?
Sure. So you can roast the bones for making stock, and that will add flavor. You roast them for 15 minutes in a hot oven, so like 450 degrees. And this would be like if you were making them from bones, so different than the process Kathy showed where she had so much meat on the bones. But if you just have just the bone itself that doesn't have any additional meat on it, you could certainly go the roasting route to add flavor.
Okay. I am going to combine a few questions. They all have the same question, and Michelle, Victoria, Denise, and Mary all would like to know about using those Instapots and pressure cookers. And I know you had talked about that earlier, Kate. Would you like to go over that again about why you cannot use them?
Sure. Yeah, we know they're called the electric programmable pressure cookers. One of the brand names is Instant Pots. They're very popular for cooking, and we have seen that some of them are even marketed as an option for canning. Unfortunately, the research that we've seen conducted by other extensions from around the country does not support that they get to temperatures hot enough for long enough to safely process your low acid foods. So the stance from extension is that they are not recommended for canning. Hopefully they will do more research and develop an appliance someday that could be an electric pressure canner, because it would be really amazing and I know put a lot of people at ease. But for now, you're just going to have to stick to using them as a pressure cooker, which there are also a lot of appliances that are simply pressure cookers and not meant for canning. So your test can be, of course, to get your manual out and see. The one that Kathy is using that's pictured there on the stove now is a 16-quart pressure canner / cooker. So you can use it like a pressure cooker. You can just put some meat or beans in the bottom and use that pressure feature to cook those faster. But it also says it's specifically designed for canning, and the smallest volume that we've seen is this 16-quart guy that we have in our kitchen.
Okay. Andrea has a question. Would you not skim the fat if you were freezing it?
We would recommend skimming the fat, yeah, just for whether you were freezing it, canning it, or just cooking it, to make for use that evening or in a few days. Yeah, skim the fat, just for quality's sake.
Okay. All right. Lisa is curious to know why you did not put veggies in while making the stock, for example, onions, carrots. Would using them and straining them out change the procedure? And could you put the meat shreds back in before canning?
So you can add additional ingredients to your stock when you're preparing it, again, for flavor. So if you have a tried and true chicken stock recipe that involves vegetables, you can prepare it that way, but you'll still want to strain out all the solids. So the processing time for stocks and for all products is based on how thick the product is. So you'll want to remove the solids and just have a liquid product to follow the canning recommendation for stock.
And does the processing time change the texture of certain vegetables or meats?
Yes, so canned products using the pressure canner are subjected to hot temperatures, sometimes for extended periods of time. So you will have a very thoroughly cooked product when you use your pressure canner.
Okay. Do we happen to know how many pints that we're canning from that crock pot recipe of broth? I'm not sure.
Answer that question. So I had 5 soup bones, which you saw in the picture. They were, quite meaty, and I put less than a gallon of water over them. And I have ended up with just 3 pints of beef stock that are in my pressure canner right now.
Okay. Does the timing vary based on how many jars you have in your pressure canner?
No, it would not change. The processing time would stay the same regardless of how many pints you had. And if you did choose to can them in quart-sized jars, it would be a longer processing time, and that is 25 minutes for quarts. And of course, you would adjust accordingly for your altitude.
Okay. We have a question from Kim. She made a marinara sauce before, then pressure canned it, and it came out burnt tasting. Is this because she cooked it and then cooked it again? Should she mix the ingredients, cook it for 5 minutes, and then pressure can it? Especially if I want to make a meat sauce, she says. So her question is maybe her procedure?
Yeah, so there is a pressure canning recipe for spaghetti sauce with meat in it. And so when you're pressure canning, you still do need to follow a recipe. The soup recipe is kind of a general guideline, but for the most part, the recipes that you use for pressure canning do have specific quantities of ingredients. And that's because if you add more of one low acid ingredient than another, you could affect the pH and therefore the processing time that's necessary to properly process that product. So I'm not sure about the burnt flavor specifically. I would think that might have happened during cooking and less during the pressure canning process, as it's a wet heat process. So there isn't really a lot of direct heat contact that could cause that kind of burnt caramelization flavor. So perhaps that happened during cooking. And we can follow up and send along the spaghetti sauce with meat recipe from the National Center for Home Food Preservation.
All right, I think we are going to Lisa for a poll now, and we'll come back to questions in a bit.
Yes, ma'am. We are going to take a poll right now. And what we would like to know is which of these practices are safe while canning soup? And you check off as many as you'd like. So adding pasta to chicken soup, filling jars 2/3 full with solids and filling the rest, using vegetables that have approved canning times, using meat that is trimmed of its fat and cut into uniform sizes, or adding milk to clam chowder. Give you all just a few more seconds you folks are fast. Look at you filling in these blanks. About half of you, oh, look at that, flying. About 5 seconds more. 4, 3, 2, 1. Terrific. What you do want to do is you do want to fill your jars only half full of solids and then fill the rest with liquid. So that was a little bit of a trick question, but most of you got that one right. You don't want to add your pasta to your chicken soup prior to canning. You want to put that pasta in. When you open your jars up for serving, you want to add your pasta and your rice and your other thickeners at that time. You do want to use vegetables that have approved canning times. Terrific. You do want to use meat that is trimmed of its fat and cut into uniform sizes. And you don't want to be adding milk to a clam chowder during the processing time because that milk is going to curdle and it's not going to be a product that you can consume after that. So terrific. Congratulations, you all. You're great listeners. Okay, we're going to go back to Kathy in the kitchen and see what's shaking.
Well, there's a lot shaking in the kitchen here. We've got the regulator jiggling. And Lisa, could you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Hear me okay? All right, because I know we got a lot of background noise here. So we are about 10 minutes into our processing time, and I'm maintaining a consistent jiggle on the regulator. And I actually have this burner turned down to its lowest point. This is our center burner. This is our highest output burner. So that, I know this stove well, as you will get to know your stove well and know where to keep your temperature so that you're at a consistent jiggle. So again, we've got about 10 minutes left in our processing time. And I want to talk a little bit about what those final steps are as we close out our pressure canning of the beef stock. So once the processing time passes, you simply turn off your heat, and then you're going to carefully remove the pressure canner from the heat source. I simply slide it over to one of the cooler grates on our stovetop. And then you need to wait. You need to wait for 30 to 40 minutes until your pressure canner cools on its own. You don't do anything to accelerate the cooling of your pressure canner, like sticking it in a kitchen sink full of cold water or transferring it to the refrigerator, sticking it in a snowbank. None of those things should happen. It needs to cool down on its own. And you will start to see signs that it is cooling down because the lock that I talked about over here, that will recede. It will no longer be sticking out like it is right over here. And then you'll also be able to see the overpressure plug looks a little bit more relaxed as the pressure inside the chamber cools down. The other thing is your weight, your regulator. After things that you've let it cool for a while, if you give it a little nudge, it will not act angry at you and kind of give you a sound if you were to jiggle it. So those are all signs that it has cooled down, but truly it is 30 to 40 minutes. So go ahead and set your timer and just wait for that to happen. And then once that time has expired and you've visually looked for cues that this is cooling down, you're going to take the weight off. It will be hot, be careful. Take the weight off, put it on your cooling rack or somewhere else. And then you're going to manually unlock the cover. And these newer models have a lot of safety features built in. One of them is that this manual lock will not release until the pressure is lowered inside the chamber. So once you can move the top, you're going to lift it away from your face, because we've built up a lot of steam in here. Even though 30 minutes goes by as it's cooling down, there is still a big blast of hot air that will come through, and you want to have that forced away from you, not towards your face. And then you simply remove your jars, put them on a cooling rack, and walk through a lot of the steps that we've talked about in our previous 16 webinars of letting them cool for 12 to 24 hours, labeling and dating them, and also making sure that you check that you have a vacuum seal. So those are some of the steps that are true for all sorts of canning and are true for our stock as well. So I want to jump back to Kate, who I think is going to take us on the home stretch and talk about some of our recommended resources that we have for you.
That's right. Thanks, Kathy. I just want to say we have a lot of unanswered questions in the Q&A. I was trying to type in back to a few there for people, but Lisa will follow up with you individually and make sure we get all your questions answered that you've asked. So even if you still have a lingering question, you can drop it into the Q&A and we'll get back to you. So we're going to be sending out these recommended resources, all the links to the recipes for the stocks and soups, so that you can get canning on your own in our follow-up email to today's webinar. And we'll also include the Maine Farm Products Directory, which will help you find local produce and shop directly at farms. We're still adding new farms to this directory, so make sure you visit the farm's website or call them first so you can learn about how their policies have changed due to COVID-19. And don't forget about our Preserving Coach program. September is one of the best months for preserving in Maine. We've got still some of the summer foods left, and the fall foods are starting to arrive at the market. So it really is go time to capture all of your favorite summer and fall flavors. So if you need a little bit of help as a first-time canner, this is a great opportunity for you to connect with a trained master food preserver volunteer who can coach you through all of your preserving needs through the fall. So we still have interested volunteers available to coach you. So if you're interested and live in Maine, you can send me an email at my address there on the screen. And we'll be back next Tuesday at 2 p.m. to discuss fermenting vegetables. Kathy, I'm keeping the sauerkraut company here in my office. Kathy's got a batch going for us. We'll also be learning about how to make kimchi and other fermented veggie products. And then we'll also be learning about dehydrating, and then it's October with winter storage, aka root cellaring, and then storing Maine grains and repackaging bulk items. So we'll share that email that will have upcoming registrations and resources, recipes from today. So look for that shortly. And we'll also send you a link to an evaluation and your certificate of completion. If you complete our program evaluation and provide us with your mailing address in the United States, we'll also send you a free Headspace tool as a thank you. So you can make sure you get your Headspace right on your home canned pressure or your soups and stocks. All right, that's it for today. So thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.